record on this. Um, Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, it's good to be here, mate. Yeah, nice to see you.
Yeah, Wes told me you were getting married as well, so you must be busy. Congratulations on that.
Yeah, it's on Saturday, so only 3 days to go now. But yeah, I'm excited about it. It'll be nice.
Yeah, and the new album, congratulations on that. Fabulous new album. I've been listening to it on a daily basis.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been a long process, it seems, to get to this point, but I'm very proud of it. I think it's a good collection of tunes. So
Hmm.
yeah, hopefully other people do as well.
What has been you've gone out on tour with it, right? You did a few shows.
Yeah, we just did an 8 day tour to promote it, and that was all in the UK. So we did an album launch in London, which was really cool.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was just good to be back on the road, and all of that sort of stuff that comes with it. Traveling around with your mates and playing shows, which we've just not really done for quite a while. So yeah, and I'm glad that it all kind of went off without any glitches or anything, which was I think part of the worry prior to the tour. So
Yeah.
nobody got COVID or anything like that, so we were okay.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me listening to the album was that I was able to relate to it, and it was a very positive sort of album. With all this, I think, negative shit that's been going around, it was much needed. Was that sort of the idea when you were writing the album?
Yeah, I think so. Very early on in the writing process, because I wrote a lot of it, I guess, at the sort of tail end of 2020 when we were still in the midst of the pandemic. I made a bit of a conscious decision to not write songs about that. I didn't want to write an album about being in lockdown and not being able to tour and all the misery that was happening. Um, I've always been drawn to music, I guess, myself, that perhaps deals with quite weighty themes, but deals with them in a positive way, because you can't just have this sort of repetition of negativity. I think you've got to have a bit of a shining light at the end of it. So hopefully my music comes across that way to people. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely does. I meant to ask you, I read an interview where you said the new album was your most personal to date. What does that mean? Can you touch upon that a little bit?
Yeah, I think most artists probably say that, don't they? When they release records, they say, "Oh, it's a really personal album." But I think this album was a way of trying to deal with a lot of difficulty I had um, a couple of years ago in terms of my dad being diagnosed with Alzheimer's and dementia, and although he's still alive, sort of feeling like I'd lost him, and actually that sort of circular feeling of constantly feeling like I was losing him. It was a really strange grieving process, and so a lot of what I tried to deal with in the lyrics of this record was that personal element of dealing with loss, but then how do you as a human being come to terms with that and then try and find a route out of it? So, there's a lot of upbeat tunes on the record. It's not a mopey album where I'm sort of writing all this kind of heartfelt acoustic stuff. It's actually more like, well, this shit has happened, but now we need to kind of like embrace life
Yeah.
and embrace everything about life that is positive.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It seemed like that a lot of the songs were sort of based on personal stories and maybe your observations of the world and whatever's been going on in the over the last couple of years. But like I said, it was positive and it was all good things.
Yeah, I think there's some stuff on there. Like there's a track called "Angel of Death," which is probably the most ballady type tune on there,
Hmm.
which has a lot of lyrics which I think are quite honest. I mean, I write songs that I've always struggled to sort of co-write really with other people, perhaps because I like to sing lyrics and I like to sing songs that I've written from the heart. I guess that's a really cliched way of saying it, but that is the truth. And I think there's some really powerful lyrics on the record that perhaps in my previous albums, the lyrics were almost an afterthought. Actually, it was
Yeah.
all about the kind of riffs and the kind of having cool guitar solos. Whereas there's still elements of that on the new record, but you know, the lyrics actually mean something on this
Yeah.
new one.
Yeah. No, because I was going to ask, being a guitar player primarily, how important is sort of songwriting to you? Because I think you can very easily go down that road of shredding and just have a guitar full of record solos. I mean, guitar solos, and the lyrics are an afterthought, like you said. So that was my next question. I was going to ask you how important is songwriting to you?
Do you know what? It sort of flipped it on its head a little bit with this new record, in that the way I approached the guitar solos was almost like melody lines. So they were almost like vocal lines. And the way that I worked with Josh Norton Cox, who was the engineer at Momentum Studios with this album, um, although we tracked a lot of it live with the band, and we kind of did that in a week, the bassist and drummer, Felipe and Laz, they basically left me to it for the next 6 months. So I did a lot of overdubs and work with them, approaching the guitar in a very different way to the way I'd done it previously, which had been very improvisational. Whereas with this one, there was a lot of thought went into it, and thinking about guitar solos as though they were snippets of lyrics, and they were conversations. And so the focus on vocals and the focus on lyrics fed into everything else, which I think was quite a cool process.
Yeah. When you say you write with other people, how do you sort of, from a band perspective, does the material sort of need to lead you in a new direction, in an exciting direction for you to sort of work with it? Is that sort of the starting point? Or do you think about how is this going to sound from an audience's perspective? What is the starting point?
It's interesting because I've written a bunch of songs over the last couple of weeks, just coming off tour. So we did a big run of shows, and actually you start writing material then thinking about that live setting. And we did think a lot about these new songs for the new album, in terms of how they would sound live. And we tried to write a collection of songs that would be from start to finish how you perform a live set, which I'd never really done that before either. The previous records, my album Paint No Fiction was a kind of hodgepodge collection of songs that I pulled together. And to a certain extent, Who Feeds the Wolf was a bit like that. Whereas this for me feels like a complete set of work. And yeah, and it feels like a live set. I mean, that's pretty much what we did on the tour. We played the album from start to finish. There's only one track we didn't play. The rest of it, we played it in order. And that was great fun to be able to do that and feel like, I've worked on albums in the past where you have your singles, you have your 2 or 3 really good songs, and then members of the band know that there's elements of filler on there, and you don't say that in the interviews, but I don't feel like there's any filler on the new record. Ask me again in 2 years and I might give you a different answer.
Yeah, but through the last couple of years, you put out, Who Feeds the Lockdown? You put out Back to the Blues. There's this album that you put out. How hard has it been for you to sort of stay productive through all the craziness of the last couple of years, your dad's illness, and all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I've always seen myself really as a songwriter. So, for 20 years, I've written material, and so no matter how I'm living my life, the way that I've tried to, almost as a mental kind of checkpoint with everything, is that I write music about it. And so that's what I did over the last 2 years. The fact that we weren't touring meant that I had more time to spend recording. So that's why I put out quite a few albums in the last couple of years. But it just meant that I remember in lockdown, I kind of set up a home studio. I'd never done that previously. And I remember about 2 weeks into the first lockdown, buying a load of equipment online and getting it delivered and building this stuff in my spare room. So I had the tools there to demo the new record. But then it was really liberating to then go to a really kick-ass studio at Momentum and be surrounded by orange amps, Marshall amps and cool guitars. So yeah, it was cool to do the lockdown stuff, but I'd much rather be surrounded by really expensive guitar equipment.
Yeah, but tell me, Jack, how do you think you've sort of evolved over your career as a guitar player? Has collaborating with different people sort of helped you evolve? Collaborating with different musicians, has that? So there was the Jack Hutchinson band. I think I remember listening to an album a few years ago. There was the stuff you did with Troy Redfern. There was the acoustic stuff that you did, and now this. How do you think you've evolved?
I think I probably don't realize how things have impacted me in the moment. It's only in reflection that you kind of look back and think, I made certain choices that were correct and others that weren't correct, and then how these people have perhaps pushed me in different ways. And I think going back to my first band, the Boom Boom Brotherhood, I had a great little band there for about 2 years, and we had a good run where we did a lot of shows, and we did those guys, Rick Baxendale and Jim Brazendale. They did all the tough gigs in me. Those were the gigs where I was trying to make a name for myself, and we were playing in like the Comedy Store on Leicester Square at midnight, and there's 4 people there. So I owe those guys a lot, and we wrote a good album actually. And then it evolved into perhaps more of a sort of solo project for me. And then when I did the stuff with Troy and Mike in RHR, that was good. I mean, that became something more than it was originally intended to be. It was supposed to just be a run of 5 or 6 shows. Then we made an album, and then we had more gigs after that. And I think that record was really great. I think Troy and Mike, as guitar players, are 2 of the best players I've ever been fortunate enough to play with. But I had my own solo career going on, and I was sort of focused on that. And I guess I'm into more kind of heavy stuff really than RHR was doing. So I just wanted to move in that direction. But I think it's the whole thing, all these experiences,
Yeah.
they mold you into who you are today.
Yeah. But Jack, without the pressure of sort of the charts and playlists and things like that, is there something that you're hoping that this album will do for the band or for you personally? Is there a sort of next step that you're hoping this album will get you to?
I suppose the main focus for me has always been to make records that I've been proud of, that then allow me to go out and tour and go and play shows. And it's funny because, that obviously the kind of numbers game that is the focus of the industry for most people, I understand why it is for record labels. And I've been involved with record labels where that's all you talk about. You don't talk about how, God, the bridge on track 6 of this record really moves me, and it takes me back to my childhood when I first listened to Exile on Main Street. Nothing to do with that. It's like, well, did you get a Spotify playlist? And so, it's been really good on this album to work with Earache again. I did an album with them a couple of years back, and they've been really supportive of what I've done. And so I think that's part of the fun really, is to kind of work with people who aren't just totally focused on numbers. But yeah, after not being able to tour for 2 years, I think that's really what I want. Yeah. And we've got some great shows lined up over the next 12 months that I'm just still glad that we managed to get an album out, get it made on vinyl, because there was a period where the vinyl manufacturing fell through, and it was Absolutely. Like, oh my God, I'm not even going to get this made. So that is an achievement in itself for me.
Yeah, but for an artist in today's world, what is the largest source of revenue? Is it touring? Is it merch? Is it both? Because I mean, obviously from streaming and stuff, you make nothing, right?
Well, probably the biggest source of revenue is painting and decorating. And I mean, I don't know, it's something else, isn't it? That's what pays for your Gibson Les Pauls. I mean, I think that, God, the biggest source of revenue really for the last 10 years whilst I've been doing this has been touring. So you plow a lot of money into making records, and then you kind of recoup that on physical sales. So I've always been very fortunate that I guess my fan base is quite interested in that physical object still, which is why I always get things made on, I made a cassette recently for my single, The Hammer Falls. Mm-hmm. And people love that. I get really good feedback from people that they like that physical object.
Yeah.
And I come from a visual arts background where I made objects, I made drawings, I made sculpture. So that is still part of what I do within my music. But in terms of the streaming revenue, I mean, it probably couldn't even pay for this hat I'm wearing. It's like, it's so poor. And I think, something really needs to change with that. But people have been saying that for quite a number of years now, and nothing's really happened. I'm a big Neil Young fan, and he got kind of criticised for taking his stuff off Spotify. We know that he kind of said it was about one thing,
Yeah,
but actually it could have been really about the streaming revenue. I mean, it's
yeah,
pretty shocking.
yeah.
And
It
it's
is. It
hilarious
is.
because people can be so hypocritical about it because everyone criticizes Spotify. But as soon as they get on a Spotify playlist, they're all on their socials going, I'm on Spotify playlist. It's like, well, last week you were slagging them off for not giving you any money. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
But has the data you get, does the data you sort of get from these streaming platforms change the way you write songs and stuff like that?
Oh, that's an interesting question. No, I never really think about
You
anything
don't think
else
about it?
apart from when I was writing a song yesterday, actually. All I'm thinking about is, does this song move me? Do I think that I would enjoy playing this in a live setting? I don't even really think about my fans as to whether they will like it. I just
Hmm.
write what I write. I had a guy. I went to see Eric Gales last week in London,
Hmm.
and a guy came up to me and he was talking about my new record, and he said. He said, it's not like your early blues stuff. He said, when are you going to get back to writing blues stuff? And I said, well, I just write what I write. I said, for me, there's elements of this new record that still is blues. Um, we could get into a really boring conversation about the kind of technical scales that I use on these tracks. And although they've got heavy drum beats, they're all pentatonic scales. They're all
Yeah.
blues scales. They're all stuff that I've nicked from Peter Green. He's just played heavier. So I don't consciously think about this stuff. I think if you start doing that, and I've tried to do that in the past,
Yeah.
I just think you start writing crap because it's contrived. You need to just write from the heart, really.
Yeah. Do you sort of see your sound slotting into a certain genre? Do you like to define it as blues rock or blues, or uh, is there really no, you can't sort of put it in a box?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably classed as blues rock, isn't it? There's loads of tagline. People like taglines, and we kind of fell into this whole kind of new wave of classic rock thing a few years ago.
Yeah.
That was, it's been great to be kind of part of that scene and and be embraced by fans of that scene here. But we went to Brazil just before the pandemic hit. Nobody in Brazil has heard of this. They don't care about new wave of classic rock. It was hilarious. I mean, they just see it, they call it rock.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so we're supposed to be going back to Brazil. We're supposed to be going at the end of this year, but it's probably going to be next year now. But I think it's labels are quite difficult because you then get pigeonholed. And when
Absolutely.
people see that you have moved away from that, they actually feel a little bit betrayed. And so I've had that with blues fans where they feel like they knew me as this acoustic blues act. And because I play Les Pauls and through Marshall Stacks now instead, they feel like, I don't know what they feel like actually. They probably feel like I don't know, fucked them over or something by changing my style. It's like, no, I just wrote some songs that are slightly different that don't
Yeah.
sound like BB King. They sound more like, I don't know, what do they sound like? They sound like me. Hopefully they sound like me. So
Yeah,
that's it.
yeah, and you'd think with the advent of streaming and all of that, people would be a little more tolerant towards artists experimenting with their sound, and or sort of wanting to listen to something else. I don't know if that's the
Yeah.
case though.
Yeah, I mean we've had a lot of chats recently about the album format. Like we've been putting albums out over the last 5 or 6 years. We've actually just been working. This week, I've just got the masters back. We've done some tracks with Kevin Shirley, who lots of people know him for working with Iron Maiden, Led Zeppelin, the Black Crowes, lots of bands that I love. But we're not going to put that out as an album. That's going to be a 4-track EP at the end of the year, and maybe that's a way of moving forwards. We kind of plow a lot of money into producing albums, but maybe one-off tracks and EPs are quite interesting because you can try different things out. There's less pressure on an EP. We could do a psychedelic funk EP, and it's not the end of the world. Whereas an album is almost like a milestone in an artist's career where it identifies a particular time and place where they sound like this,
Yeah.
and maybe it's easier to just stick out EPs. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting strategic move as well to constantly sort of stay top of mind and maybe put out a single every month, and put
Yeah.
out the odd EP and then sort of use social media and everything else to stay top of mind with your fan base or with sort of trying to get discovered.
Yeah, I think it's everything's evolving all the time, isn't it? And if you look at where we were 20 years ago, when I was buying music as a teenager and I would go down on a Monday, that's when things used to come out and buy CD singles and things like that. I used to love that side of things, but I'm also excited by how it's evolved. And that one of the greatest things that I love about all of this is that communication with people.
Yeah.
And whether it be online or physically, I love chatting to people after shows and hanging out and having a drink with them. And that was one of the greatest things about being back on tour recently, was that you got to see these people face to face. And it's funny because a lot of people that my fan base has grown over the last 2 years. I think that it's been good to engage with people with the live streams and everything, but meeting people face to face when all you've seen is like their
Yeah.
profile image. And
Fantastic. Yeah.
it's like, hey, you don't actually look like George Clooney in reality. That's strange. Yeah.
But from a recording perspective, Jack, how do you sort of capture the energy of playing live? How do you capture that in a studio?
Yeah, I think it's quite difficult actually, and the modern production techniques are such that actually a lot of it is kind of covered up. The actual ability to play as a band is covered up. That's why these tracks that we've done with Kevin Shirley are really great, in that he's not one to kind of polish the stuff. Like
Yeah.
you've got to fucking play. Like that's that isn't the way that kind of polishing everything within an inch of its life. Kevin makes records that sound like real bands, how bands used to sound.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we did a track just before Christmas that was done in a day. Like we recorded the whole thing in a day. That was me and Felipe, the drummer, just basically tracking it all live, and then I overdubbed the vocals. And so, done and dusted. I mean, that captures a moment in time. I have a lot of issues with kind of contemporary production that is given this kind of auto-tune sheen. I'm not particularly into that. My favorite bands are bands like the Black Crowes, and you listen to Shake Your Moneymaker by the Crowes, and there's no auto-tune on that album, and it sounds pretty damn good to me. So you've got to have an element of that, but there's an expectation actually with contemporary audiences that expect this kind of sheen on stuff that I think you can strike a balance. I mean, one of my favorite records from last year was the Smith Kotzen album, which I felt.
Oh yeah, it was great album.
You can hear good how good they are as musicians. You can hear that they're great singers. You can hear they're great guitarists, and
Yeah.
it doesn't sound like it was manufactured by a computer.
Yeah. Did you see them live?
Yeah, I saw them a couple of weeks back actually. My mates, the Dust Coda, were supporting them on that tour. And yeah, they played Winter's End. We were on the bill at Winter's End as well, so that was really cool to see them. And one interesting thing of that, we'd been playing shows ourselves, but I hadn't been out front and watched a gig. And so when I'm playing my shows, obviously you have the energy of being on stage, but actually the energy of being an audience member. I was like, God, I fucking missed this. It was great. How loud it was as well. It was just nice to leave a gig with ringing ears. It was amazing.
I can imagine. No, you were saying tracking it live in the studio. You make it sound very easy, but I don't think is it easier to sort of layer it, or is it easier to just go in a studio as a band and play live and sort of record like that?
Well, I don't know whether it's easier. What we did with the new album is that we did a lot of pre-production, which I'd never done before. So we did sort of maybe 2 weeks of going through the material. The way I've previously made records is actually bit by bit. So grabbing some studio time in between being on tour. I remember doing bits of Who Feeds the Wolf, where I had a tour of the Czech Republic, flew back to the UK. I did 2 days in the studio. Then I was in Spain. It's kind of crazy, like a kind of crazy way to do it. But actually, because we did it in blocks for this new one, where we actually learnt the songs, you know, rather than here's a click track, here's a
Exactly.
rough
Yeah.
acoustic, and then you do the drums to the click, and then you just piece it all together. That's how
Correct.
I'd made records previously. But to be in a big, lovely studio space and play those songs, knowing that we knew what we were fucking doing because we'd done the pre-production, that was a lot of fun, really. And I think the results are better for it because it sounds there's more energy in the tracks. I maybe it's something that I hear and nobody else can hear, the difference between the sorts of way of recording. But for me, it's I think it's got more vibrancy. I was listening to the new Slash record a couple of weeks back, and he
Hmm.
did that very similar thing. You know,
Yeah,
tracking
exactly.
live is
Yeah.
a different vibe, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But tell me the role of the sort of the team that that goes into making an album like this. There was Josiah Manning, there was Josh Norton Cox. What is the role of the producer specifically?
Well, the way that we did this record was that we chose to produce it ourselves. That was the original plan. So me, Laz, and Felipe were going to hire a studio, get an engineer, and then do the production ourselves.
Hmm.
Um, didn't quite work out that way because Josh, who is absolutely brilliant, he's a great producer in his own right. So as the record progressed, I think Josh became more and more involved in the production side of it, particularly those overdub sessions with me where, you know, the original plan was like we'd do all the guitar parts in 2 days, and then I'd be like, we'd spend 2 days doing guitars on one track, and it's like we've actually got 10 guitar tracks on there, so it did get a little bit out of control, which was
Hmm.
all my own fault. But then Josiah, because it's his studio and he lives at the studio, he obviously doesn't live in the control room. He lives in a nice flat above it. But he would pop in and give us suggestions. And so when it came to the mixing stage,
Hmm.
um, Josiah said to me, I remember we were having a coffee sat outside the studio in the glorious summer sunshine, and he said, you know, if I want to kind of overdub some stuff or tinker with things, are you happy for me to do that? And I said, look, I trust you to make the right decisions on these songs. So Josiah did some editing on some of the stuff. You know, one of the tracks was originally about 9 minutes long. That was the Raven's Crow, and he's kind of brutal in his assessment. And he just said, "Look, I'm not being funny, but this song is just boring. You get about 4 minutes in, and it hasn't even started." And I was like, "No, I've been listening to And Justice for All. This is like, you know, it's like a Metallica song. It's going to be." And he was just like, "Yeah, but you're not Metallica." Like, um, we just stripped loads of it. And I remember Laz was really annoyed about that because it was a co-write between me and Laz. But I think it was better for it. And when people started getting the album through, a lot of people said that was one of their favorite tracks. So I stand by that decision. But yeah, they're great people, and
Hmm.
they're very, very talented at pulling, you know, a, a lot of my ideas into a kind of concrete reality,
Yeah,
which sometimes is tricky for people.
yeah, but
There's
that's
a joke
great.
about
Go ahead, go ahead.
there's a, there's a joke where Laz always brings this up about when we were trying to record the drums on. I think it was the Raven's Crow, and you know, I don't have any technical musical training, you know, so my descriptions are a bit like, I don't know, play the bass like the color purple. And then they're like, what does that even mean? And so with that song, I said, I got on the mic into the room, and I was like, Felipe, imagine you're a frog coming over a hill and you're knackered. And Felipe was like, I'm sorry, what does that even mean? And so then it's like Josh and Laz having to explain what I'm actually going on about. So I find that stuff quite funny.
Yeah, but I think that that speaks to a lot. That says a lot about the dynamic. I think the three of you share, and I think uh, you know you sort of need that. I think that dynamic to go into a studio and record live and pull off an album, right?
Everything for me is about emotion and whether things
Yeah.
move me. And I think having that balance where you've got two guys in my band who have formal musical training, they were a unit playing with other bands before they joined my setup, means that we can still have that technical specific. What's the word? Kind
Specificity.
of that's how you say it. Um, but then I come at it more from a, I think back to like the first time I heard, I don't know, Wild Horses or a track like that. I wasn't thinking what chords is Keith Richards playing. I'm
Yeah.
thinking that this song really kicks me in the gut. This is an amazing track. And I think you can kind of get lost in the technical aspects a lot of the time, but I'm not really into that. I'm into whether this love song emotes how I've been feeling about this woman, or
Hmm.
something like that, or I'm pissed off about um, feeling like I've been let down by this person.
Hmm.
And I don't really give it. I couldn't tell you the chords on some of these songs, but I know how to play them. So there's a difference.
Yeah, but Jack, talking about playing live, do you think it's sort of the record and the live show? You played this. You said you played the album live, right? Um, is it sort of connected in some way, or when you play live, do you tend to improvise? And does the music translate better when it's being played live than listening to it on a CD? You think?
Yeah, I think because I mean, some of this stuff, I guess we completed recording in May of last year. So it's
Hmm.
been almost a year since we played these songs in the studio. So there's a really exciting element to taking it out on the road, and you discover different things in the songs. And I always see this with songs. I don't feel like they're finished in a studio. That's kind of the beginning of a journey with it. And you then go out and play it live, and you adapt certain songs, and you might actually do, I don't know, you might take it on a sort of bit of a space jam in the middle of the track or whatever, I don't know, but most of the time you're just evolving those little elements. But one of the fun things is the vocals, because you sing it slightly differently live. You can kind of let wail a little bit more. There's
Hmm.
less of the kind of um histrionics when you're in a studio, where you've actually got to sing things kind of spot on and in tune. Um, you can just rock out live, and I really like that
Yeah.
release.
Yeah.
And when you've worked so hard on an album and you've got that kind of perfect set of 10 tracks, to
Hmm.
then be able to go out and just kind of, even on guitar solos, where you've, like I said, I spent a lot of time working these solos out for this record so that they told a story and they weren't just mindless noodling. You can do a bit more of the mindless noodling live, because that's, you're performing for people, and people don't want to hear it played identically to the record.
Absolutely.
But I see bands that do that, and I tell you what, it's just so boring. The bands that I loved when I was a kid, like the Black Crows, I remember going to see the Black Crows on 3 gigs when they played at Shepherd's Bush Empire,
Hmm.
and they played about 80 different songs. I thought it was great. It was like, well, that for me was what a band was. It
Yeah.
wasn't playing to backing tracks and playing the same thing every night. I
Absolutely.
mean, how tedious. You might as well
Yeah.
just be in your bedroom playing for yourself.
As a fan and as somebody as a music photographer, for me, the fascinating thing when I watch an artist or a band live is that sometimes it sort of tends to bring out different personalities in the artist or the band. And it's not something you would have sort of understood by just listening to the record, but seeing them live is like a whole new side to this artist and the band. And that's what I think is, fascinating about being a fan and a sort of photographer. So,
Yeah, I think that when I originally started playing music, I was quite a shy teenager, and
mhm.
I found it really difficult chatting to people and opening up to people. And I could do that when I was on stage playing guitar. And I think for better or worse, over the years, I've become more open as a person, and probably people say they'd probably like me to shut up more now. But I think when I was a teenager, I was, I had long hair and I used to have it all over my face, and I used to mope around in my own little world. But then when I got on stage, it was like unleashing the beast, and I still have that to a certain extent. I mean, if people try and talk to me pre-gig, I'm sort of in my own little world where I'm doing my kind of vocal routines
Hmm.
and things, and I'm very focused on getting on stage. But then when I'm on stage, you can let it all out. And I see it with my bandmates as well. Actually, Felipe, the drummer, is kind of Felipe all the time. He doesn't really change. But Laz, my bass player, is quite a reserved character, and he's quite shy. He would quite happily pre-show sit there reading a book, reading Lord of the Rings, and then when he gets on stage, he looks like he looks like a bad guy from Sons of Anarchy or something. I don't know. It's quite hilarious watching him transform. And that's quite amazing, really, to be able to have that platform to allow those emotions to come out is quite powerful, I think.
Yeah. I just want to, go back a little bit. What was it like for you growing up in Leicester in the 80s, and when did you sort of decide that you wanted to do music full time?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't really into the idea of playing music, and I went to guitar lessons. I was sort of forced to go to guitar lessons by my dad, and I hated it. I just wanted to play football, really, and that was my big thing when I was sort of 10, 11. I wanted to be a footballer, um, which, unfortunately, the natural abilities to be a footballer weren't quite as good as the music. But I remember going to guitar lessons and dreading it each week. I never did my homework. I've always had a bit of an issue with people telling me what to do. So I think that was part of the problem, was this guy telling me to learn quite classical pieces of music that I found really boring. My dad used to listen to the Rolling Stones like all the time. I remember we had the Stripped album in the car. So a lot of those tracks that I then felt were kind of ingrained in me were from that kind of essentially a best of set from the Stones. So when I had the courage to say, I don't want to go and do these guitar lessons anymore, the guy that taught me said, my mum said, oh, is he good enough to go off and learn on his own? And I remember him saying, no, I don't think he's good enough. And actually, as soon as he said that, I thought, right, well, I'll prove you wrong then. So I got a guitar book. I remember learning Stones stuff and Beatles stuff, which is actually relatively easy, And when you kind of look back, it's a gateway into stuff, because you try and play Satisfaction and it's actually relatively easy. And having been taught classical music for 2 years, I was like, well, I can play this and it sounds really good. So then it kind of evolved into, Led Zeppelin were the big band for me when I was a teenager. And when I got into Zepp, I was like, mind was blown, grew my hair, drew some dragons on my trousers and tried to be Jimmy Page, and Song Remains the Same. So that whole process of learning guitar was kind of kicked off really through a guy being a bit of a dick towards me. And I think I've still got that in me, really, when, if somebody says they don't want me to do something or they don't like something, I don't sit there and wallow. It's up to you to then sort of prove them wrong and use that kind of negativity, I suppose, as fuel to be a better person. So yeah.
Yeah. Was there a particular guitar player that sort of influenced your sound the most? Because on the album I could tell there was like Black Sabbath, and I could sort of, figure out who broadly the influences were. And then I heard a cover of War Pigs that you had done. So,
yeah, like I say, Jimmy Page was the big one when I was a teenager. But Jimmy Page offered a gateway into other musicians. So Slash was a big player for me. I think you can probably hear a bit of Slash in my riffs and guitar solos. Zakk Wylde became a big thing for me when I was about sort of 18, 19. But then that led into, listening to bands like Pantera and Dimebag and that kind of technical aspects of playing sort of metal music became a big thing for me. And I really went down that route for about 2 years of, spending 6 or 7 hours a day doing my alternate picking techniques. And, I was in a metal band for a bit. And actually, I think that was around the time I wrote some of my worst music, because I was so obsessed with the technical aspects of stuff that I lost touch with the emotive element. Yeah. And so it actually took a little bit of a break away from practicing every day. I actually stopped practicing because I thought, I'm not writing any songs here. So taking a week off the guitar and then picking it up without doing scales and just trying to write some material offered me a route back in. But yeah, a lot of those artists were Les Paul users. So another musician I really got into when I was a teenager was John Squire from the Stone Roses. Yeah. And he was influenced heavily by Jimmy Page. And so I Second Coming by the Stone Roses. Everyone slags that album off, but I prefer it to the first one. It really got me into kind of a lot of sort of bluesy playing that I probably otherwise wouldn't have done. And John Squire was a really melodic player, so it
Yeah.
wasn't all about a million notes. It was there's a track on there called 10 Story Love Song, which has got some beautiful guitar playing on, and I still think that that has an influence on me today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But tell me, Jack, for kids of today who are playing guitar or interested in playing guitar, uh, do you think they should be technically trained? Do you think they should learn how to read and write music, or should you just go the sort of YouTube route where there's there's hacks and shortcuts and tabs for everything? So
Yeah, I mean, part of me regrets when I was a teenager and I had more kind of time to do it, not focusing on that kind of music theory and
yeah,
understanding what I'm doing more. But then again, I don't think I'd be quite as good a songwriter as I am because whilst I had a lot of friends who were doing that, who were still going to guitar lessons, and I remember guitarists at school trying to show off to me on their Ibanez's all this shit that they'd learned at their lessons, and I was like, well, that's cool, but I'm listening to After the Gold Rush by Neil Young. Like,
yeah,
that was what I was into. So, yeah, that's great, man. You've got an Ibanez guitar and you sound like, well, it sounds like you've been electrocuted, actually. You're playing so fast. But whilst I'm trying to learn how to write some good songs. So every band I was in as a teenager, I always ended up writing all the songs because all the guys that were in it were just into showing off.
yeah,
And I was like, well, I'm going to write some stuff that means something to me, and I think that held me in good stead. But I would definitely say to kids, it is useful knowing that stuff. I wish, like there was some hilarious conversations in the studio when we're doing the Hammer Falls where Josh, Laz, and Felipe would be talking about this technical aspect about a song I'd written. And I'd just be sat there, like looking at the football results. I just said, I don't know what I've written here. The song "What Doesn't Kill You." I mean, that was quite
yeah,
an undertaking to write that song. And I've been listening to a lot of Iron Maiden around that period, so I was very excited about the new Maiden album coming out as well. And I just wrote a Maiden track. I knew that we were going to be doing some stuff with Kevin Shirley, so I kind of thought, well, maybe I'd write something that's a little bit like this. And they're discussing all the key changes, what the guitar solo is doing, and Josh is asking me these questions, and I was like, I have no fucking clue. It just sounded good when I wrote it, so
yeah,
I think it. So I'll tell you what, this is the advice for teenagers: if you decide to go down the route of being really into your kind of technical aspects of stuff, make sure you get one guy in your band who drinks loads of booze, tries to act like a rock star, and writes some good songs. There you go.
yeah. That's a good one. But Jack, you were talking earlier about how stressful being on the road can be. How do you sort of stay fit? Um, being on the road, do you manage to do that at all?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm quite into fitness anyway. I mean, I've always played football and I've always done running, but when you're on the road, you can't do that really. I mean, as much as I mean, I have done it in the past where I've taken like my running kit with me with the best intentions. There's no way, like when you're driving around the middle of Spain and you're lost in the mountains or whatever, which has happened, you're not thinking, right, I'm just going to hop out, guys, and do a 5K.
Yeah,
So one of the problems I've always had is that I come back from tours and I feel like crap. I've lost like all fitness whatsoever, and usually gained about 2 stone through eating Ginster's pasties at 2 a.m. But gigging actually does keep you fit because you're particularly the music we're playing now, where you're jumping around, and I think that you need to be physically on point, otherwise you can't keep up the consistency across a whole tour. So this is probably something that people that were digging my music 5 years ago, when they used to see me sat on a stool playing acoustic blues and getting drunk halfway, they probably don't like that I take it a bit more professionally now. But the point is that when I go out and do a 14-day tour, we don't tend to really have a day off. We will do 14-day, because if you have a day off, that's money that you're losing really.
yeah,
If you've got 14 days, you can't be mucking around with that. But then
absolutely.
you do come back feeling. one of my favorite movies is Almost Famous, and I always think about that final scene, the very final scene where he gets home and just falls on his bed.
Yeah.
That is me. But there's something lovely about that. And then my fiance Liz, she'll come in and be like, "You really need to go and have a shower now."
Lastly,
Yeah.
Jack, before I let you go, what you have tour plans with the album? You said you were going to go to Spain, and then you have a UK tour as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to America in late May, early
Hmm.
June, which should be really cool. Not been to America for a while. I was supposed to be going to Russia just after that, but obviously that isn't happening. Um, then we're potentially going to Switzerland. We've got Spain in September. We've got a UK tour. We're trying to work out the stuff with Brazil, trying to get back over there. But as I say, that'll probably be next year now. So it's going to be quite busy. I've got like a month off now because I'm getting married, which is going to be quite nice. I don't really have time off, but I'm about halfway writing the next record. So I reckon what I'll probably write some more material when I've got my 4 weeks off now.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's all good, man. It's all good, and I'm just looking forward to, as I say, being on the road with the guys and having a lot of fun.
Wonderful, Jack. Thank you so much for doing this. All the best with everything. That's it for this week's episode of Tales from the Road. Tales from the Road is brought to you by the concert photographer and moving pictures media. Don't forget to join us next week for another episode. If you like what you heard, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or Google Play. Thank you for listening.